All right. So we'll go ahead and get started. If anyone joins late, that's completely fine. So the presentation, academic success workshop we're going over today is last minute study habits. So mainly focusing on our upcoming finals, how to study for them, and the timeline and so forth. Just a quick introduction. My name's Madison. I'm the Academic Consultation and Engagement Graduate Assistant for SARC, which is the Student Academic Resource Center. I'm in my second year in my Clinical Psychology Master's program here at UCF, and I got my bachelor's in psychology and criminology from UF, so definitely had to take a good number of finals in my day. So just going over, well, we'll go through the agenda here. Just going to do a general review of SARC services and then also what study union is. And then we'll go over a general timeline that you guys can all use for studying, as well as an activity to kind of help prep you for finals coming up. And then we'll go into specific study habits and then test anxiety and tips for finals. And then the last one is just going to be a resources page to look at. So in general, SARC Services has four main groups. We have peer tutoring, which has one-on-one and group sessions for mainly STEM courses, some business courses as well. And they're more catered to high drop, fail, withdraw courses. That's what the DFW means, which when we look at statistics, we see what courses UCF students are more likely to have problems in, and then we cater towards those classes. Then there's also supplemental instruction. The main difference here is that they're shorter and there's 4 weekly group sessions held by a SI leader, and that's going to be mainly group work that's guided, and then the SI leader actually attends the class with you, so there'll be kind of like a learning assistant or TA there in that class as well with that specific professor. And then we'll also have academic consulting and engagement sessions, which that is the program that I'm the graduate assistant for. So these are one-on-one hour-long virtual or in-person sessions where you essentially just go over areas where you think you need improvement, whether that's time management, study skills, preparation for testing, motivation, anything along that area. And then the last one is academic success workshops, which is essentially this. They're hour-long workshops that go over different areas to help you improve, kind of like ACE consulting, but in a larger group format. And then I also want to go over study union. So study union is a period of multiple review sessions held by our peer tutors and SI leaders. So these are going on from the 24th to the 4th. I actually want to navigate to the website for you here. If you go to our normal website and just type in UCF SARC on Google, we're the first link. And then if you click on our study union page, this is what it'll bring you to. And then the study union WordPress has all the information on it. And if you scroll down here, you'll see the actual schedule. So I kind of just wanted to go over the schedule with you all. Just so you know what's happening, you can see all of the courses here. I think there's about 60 to 80 sessions. I'm not sure I need to count this time, but we hold them in the fall and in the spring. So there's one session on the 19th, but all the others range from the 24th, 25th, 26th, and then we also have some on the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th. And then there's also drop-in ACE consulting if you want to show up for that. So definitely check that out, especially if you have a STEM course or business related course, because those are really helpful, and it's essentially going to be a 2-hour review session. All right, so back to the general workshop here. So I'm trying to put this on full screen. There we go. All right. So the first thing I wanted to discuss is kind of your studying timeline. So the number one thing that you want to do is start your studying early. So the reason for this is because essentially if you're trying to information. So what you want to do instead is something called space studying. So space studying is essentially studying every day leading up to the test from a specific day. So I like to do at least 1 week. I find that the 1 week area is kind of that sweet spot, mainly because when if you're doing longer than that, one, it's possible that you haven't learned all the information yet. Or two, since you do have so many exams you have to study for sometimes, it's just not feasible. So I definitely recommend looking at about that 1 week period before the actual final exam day and start planning your study time from there. So this is just a little example I did. If you have a final exam on December 2nd, the day that you need to start sitting down and scheduling out your study time from that day forward is going to be November 25th. Basically, there's just 7 days in between there. You can study every single day, up until that final exam day, but I'll get more into that further in the presentation. The next thing you need to do is determine how long you need to study per day. So very bare minimum, I always recommend is going to be 30 minutes a day per day leading up to the test. So with 30 minutes, that is going to be more so for easier classes. If you feel like you have been doing very well in the class, you understand the concepts, and you don't really need to do anything but refresh and kind of maintain the information, then 30 minutes a day is going to be your sweet spot. It's perfect. However, if it is a very difficult class for you, you're going to need to up that study time. So if you've been struggling in the class, you've been getting lower grades on the exams or assignments, then definitely increase that to maybe 2 hours, 3 hours a day. Additionally, it doesn't need to be the same time per day or same amount of time per day. So if one day you're doing 3 hours, the next day you're kind of crunched for time, you only do an hour. That's completely fine as long as you're at least doing something to kind of keep that flow going and cement the information in there. Also, you can vary it. If you're feeling like, okay, we're on the 5th day of studying, you feel very confident, then maybe the next 2 days you just do reviews of 30 minutes each. Alternatively, if you've only been doing like an hour each day and you're on that 5th day and you're not feeling too great about it, then just increase it to 2 or 3 hours so you can get more study time in there without having to cram on that very last day. So this is kind of an example of how you can plan this out. I know everyone is not a person who uses a planner or a calendar, but going into your final exams, it can be an easy time to start. Um, and you also don't need to go crazy like this and plan every single hour of your day. The very least you need to do is plan in when that study time is going to be. So this can be as easy as going into your phone and pulling up Google Calendar or your Apple Calendar and saying, okay, we'll use the 25th for the example. On the 25th, I'm going to start studying from 3 p.m. to 5 p.m. and put exactly what class and what you're studying. So if you look here, there's specific time blocks to study each day in the pink here. And it's spaced out. This is only giving about 5 days. And then that 6 is extra. Like I said, I really prefer to do 7 days, or 6 days with a review day. But whatever works best for you. Most importantly is that this schedule shows that there's space studying here. So there's about an hour and a half to 2 hour block each day to specifically study, and they know when they're going to do that. This helps you be more accountable because you know when you are going to study, and it's harder to avoid it when you have a notification popping up, or it's kind of already in your head that I can't do anything other than this because you already spaced it out. You know, you don't have work, class, or anything else during that time. Additionally, if you guys do want to do this, we have this on our website at UCF SARC. So I'll show this really quickly because I do think it's a great resource to have. If you go to UCF SARC, just on Google, this is going to be the first link. And if you go under resources, and then you can go under study skills and test prep here. It's also under time management. There's the sample study plan, which we'll go into later. But this gives you like day by day when you're going to do everything. And then if you go to time management, you can see under, I think it's the 8-hour day. Here's an easy one where you can just do your Monday through Sunday and type right in here what you're going to do for each hour. So definitely recommend those two resources that are available. All right, back to this. So the next thing that I kind of was talking about earlier is breaking down the content on the exam into specific sections that you're going to study each day. So rather than just being like, okay, every day studying for 2 hours leading up to the exam, we can do a specific schedule. So for Monday, you would do chapters 1 and 2, Tuesday, 3 and 4, and so on. But this helps because you can focus on specific concepts or specific chapters without feeling so overwhelmed, especially since finals can sometimes be cumulative or they'll be at least over the last since midterm. So I find that this helps make it a lot more easy than just sitting there and being like, okay, I need to remember and learn everything since the beginning of the semester. If you break it down into specific content for each day, then on Sunday, you can, or the last day, not necessarily Sunday, but you'll take that time to review everything. So what I strongly suggest and what we're going to do for the activity here is to take about 10 minutes just to fill out the specific chapters and materials that you're going to need for each exam that you have coming up. For today, we are just going to do, we're just going to do one exam. I think that's the next slide. Yeah. So we're just going to do one exam for time, but I will show, I can also drop it in the chat actually. Okay, here we go. Essentially what I was saying is that if you have a more content to learn, it's obviously going to be a lot longer study time than if you have only a couple chapters. So I'm going to go ahead and drop this in the chat, and then I'll also pull it up on the screen here. So this is this fillable study plan. Again, this is accessed, what I showed earlier, through our website. I dropped it in the chat if you guys want to navigate to that. And then that should load. Okay, cool. I'm gonna go ahead and create my, oh no, I have my sample study plan. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and pause the recording for a second while you guys all fill that out, or at the very least find your study date and or exam date and schedule days to study within that. I'm gonna run through a quick example that I put in the PowerPoint. So if we go back there. Okay, so here is where I kind of put my example one. So I just, for this example, I said that the exam is going to be due on Sunday. And then I did a plan for each day leading up to it. As you can see, I did mainly 2-hour periods, but then this day only 1-hour period. And then I also put specifically what chapters I'm going to use to study, and then what lectures. Sometimes lectures can be titled like the craziest things when you're trying to find them on Canvas or Canvas. So I like to make sure I know which ones I'm going to refer to for each chapter. And then I'll say what activity I'm going to do. I just put in make flashcards, review flashcards for vocab as kind of an example, but a little later I have a bunch of other activities you guys can all do, and that will expand upon that. Okay, so just for study habits. So study habits kind of refers to how you are actually studying, where you're studying, and so on. I think a lot of students kind of forget about this, that where they're studying is really going to impact how much you retain the information. So for example, if you are planning out 2 hours to study, but then you're doing that studying within your living room, it's not going to be as effective and as good as a 2 hour study session in a distraction-free environment such as the library or at your desk or something like that. But that's based upon you as well. So definitely be realistic with yourself and honest about where you study the best and where you can concentrate most. A lot of people love a study group, but if that study group is more of a social hour, then it might not be the most effective to learning the material. And then also avoid anywhere where you know you're going to be easily distracted. So for me, that would be my bedroom, just because if my bed's like 3 feet away from me, I'm going to be a lot more tempted to stop studying than if I am in the library at a desk or in my office or something like that. And then also purposely limit distractions for yourself. So one big thing is putting your phone in a physically different location. So if that's in your backpack, even if it's in another room, something like that. So then instead of just like mindlessly picking up your phone when you're studying, it has to be kind of more of an active decision to get your phone out of your backpack or out of a drawer or something. And then also mute messages / emails on your laptop. That one I think is something no one really thinks about, but it's so easy if it just pops up. So try to mute those. And then prepare and organize your area. So before you sit down to study, make sure you have everything beforehand. So some of this can be something as simple as like a glass of water, a calculator, stuff like that. Because if you're sitting down for a 2 hour study session, but you have to keep getting up every like 15 minutes because you need to grab a new notebook, you need to grab a different pen or whatever, then that really breaks up your study time more than you expected and you're not getting the full 2 hours. So just little things like this really add up. So kind of just organize, prepare, and set an intention to have an effective study session, and that will make it better than just being like sitting down and be like, okay, time to study, because then you're not going to get the full X amount of time that you decided to study out of it. And the last thing I said was to create a comfortable space slash just environment, even if it is the library, wear comfy clothes, put on headphones or whatever, just so you can stay there longer than just like 20 minutes. Because if you are uncomfortable slash feel uncomfortable, you're not going to want to be studying for an extended period of time. So I'm gonna expand on this study habits video. It's our video from our YouTube channel, which is a little old, but I think it has a lot of good information. But this is kind of a little preview slash synopsis that I will go further into. But I'm gonna go ahead and put it up here.
Welcome to Study Skills and Test Preparation. Do you find yourself spending countless hours studying, but not getting the results you would like? Perhaps you are not using the most efficient study strategies to prepare for exams. In this video, we will cover 5 types of study strategies for effective test preparation and better mastery of course content. You will want to start this process as soon as possible, as studying is a large investment, and you do not want to cram. First, let's look at your study environment. Do you currently study on your bed, on the floor, at the kitchen table? How about the library? If you are on your bed, your brain does not know if you're there to study or to sleep. This makes it easier to get distracted or doze off. If you're at the kitchen table, instead of focusing on studying, you may be tempted to get something to eat. Better options would be to study in the library or at a desk, since you will know exactly what you are there to do and will be able to dive right into your work. It is always important to study in a place that is conducive to studying. Now, let's talk about the 5 types of studying. Studying to gather information, studying to learn information, studying to check for learning, studying to refresh, and studying to improve learning skills. When studying to gather information, you must organize everything needed in order to learn. Compile any study guides professors have given you, as well as your textbook, lecture, and chapter notes. First, make sure that you are reading your textbook thoroughly. One way to do this is by using the SQ3R method, which stands for survey, question, read, recite, and review. To survey your textbook, make note of the print, italics, charts, graphics, chapter summaries, and end of chapter questions. This shouldn't take more than a few minutes as you are only identifying each chapter's core ideas. Next, develop questions from the main ideas you discovered during your survey. Now you can read and actively seek the information that will answer your questions instead of plodding through each line of text. Reading this way helps to prevent the blank mind syndrome, which is the inability to remember what you just read. Next, recite the answers you have found aloud from memory.
What are the 2 laws of inheritance? 2 laws of inheritance, law of segregation and law of independent assortment.
When you finish a chapter, try to answer your questions without looking at your notes or the text. You can then use the answers in your notes or text to check and see how much you have learned.
Organism with a pair of identical alleles.
Lastly, you should review these notes every 2 to 3 days. Now that you have adequate textbook notes, make sure to attend class and take notes on the lecture to fill in the gaps. To ensure the accuracy of your notes, you can compare them with those of a trusted classmate. You can also confirm your notes with your professor. Some suggested forms of note-taking include the Cornell format, note cards, and outlines. These formats facilitate reviewing and learning. When studying to learn the information you have gathered, frequent repetition becomes an important part of retention, but you must also learn to understand the meaning of the information, not just memorize. Individual studying and study groups are both equally beneficial, and getting creative with tough concepts is also encouraged. Time management is essential throughout this process. Make sure to define your priorities and create a timeline for yourself. You can refer to our time management video for more information. It is very important that you study to check for learning. The best strategy to create deep and durable learning is self-testing. Retrieving information on a regular basis helps you build strong connections in the brain and solidify concepts in your long-term memory. The harder and longer it takes you to recall, the stronger your retention will be. Quiz yourself without the help of notes or books. Take out a blank sheet of paper or use a whiteboard to write down everything you know about the subject which you are studying. You and a fellow student can also create practice tests and question each other in the format you expect on the exam. Repeat this process 2 to 3 times weekly if necessary to make sure you thoroughly master the subject. You can now study to refresh your knowledge, so you do not forget the material you have learned. Rehearse the concepts you haven't reviewed in a while to make sure they stay in your long-term memory. To ensure maximum retention, you should do this without the aid of your notes. The first 4 types of studying are designed to prepare you for what is important prior to taking your exam. Studying to improve learning, on the other hand, is what occurs after you have taken your test or quiz. Use your test results as feedback to help you modify or replace study skills in preparation for your next test or quiz. If you did not do as well as you had hoped, be sure to analyze your current study strategies and behaviors. Be honest with yourself and think about what type of studying you could have spent more time on. Talk to other students who did well on their exam and see what they did differently. This may help you discover different strategies that will work better for you in the future. You may also want to consider utilizing campus resources, such as SARC, tutoring, and supplemental instruction. By focusing on each of these steps from the beginning of the semester, and by managing your time and tasks wisely, you will never again have to cram before your exams. If you need additional support with study skills and test preparation, please come.
All right, so the end of that just says to come to SARC, which is now a new location, which is Trevor Colborne Hall 117. But what I really liked from that is the kind of different timeline of studying and what part you're kind of doing what in. But beyond that, I kind of want to go to, let me represent here. Okay. I want to go to kind of the number one thing that I think helps a lot is varying your study methods. So a lot of people see studying as kind of just sitting down and opening your notebook or opening your textbook or whatever and trying to memorize that information to the best of your ability. And while that can kind of work and be somewhat helpful, it's not going to get you to kind of where you need to be, especially when you have so much information to learn for a final. So doing different types of studying is going to be the most effective. I have the next slide is going to be a bunch of different methods, but I kind of wanted to see if you guys had any common study methods you already use. You could drop it in the chat if you want. I know the biggest one I like to use is making my own study guide. So if the professor hasn't provided a study guide, which oftentimes they don't, especially if you're going into like higher levels, kind of just making your own. So for each chapter, and this like counts into your study time as well. So for each chapter, kind of look through your notes and the textbook, as well as like PowerPoints from class, see what the most important concepts are and the concepts that have been discussed the most, and then make questions and answers based on that. So you could do that in a flashcard format. I like to do it in a big document on Word so I can easily just search it when I'm studying. And then that also helps you self-test. So that was discussed in the video. Essentially, self-testing is having a question, either a question that you made or a question from the text or anything like that, and then being able to answer that yourself without like a multiple choice situation going on, because that way you can see what you know versus what you don't know, and it's a really easy way to kind of assess where you're at and figure out what you need to learn. So here's a bunch of different study methods that I wanted to go over. So the video discussed the SQR3 method of textbook reading. So this can be good if you do have notes already and you haven't really been referring to your textbook too much, but you notice that the tests do. So this can be really helpful to kind of see a quicker way rather than just sitting there and reading the textbook. Another way is to rewrite notes. So this can be tedious, and rewriting notes isn't just rewriting exactly what you wrote for the first time again. It is essentially condensing them and then making either questions or summaries and stuff like that. So I think that can be very helpful. Creating your own study guide, that's my favorite. And then with that, a self-test, kind of make own version of the test for yourself. If you do have a if you have like a math-based test or a test where you have to, a lot of times chemistry will do that too, where you have problems you need to solve for, using previous quizzes and tests and relying on that to see to do practice problems and see what that's like. That's very helpful. If you are going to make flashcards for vocab, if you have anatomy or like vocab heavy exams, then what you do is you need to practice them forward and backward and in different orders so that you can be able to answer it in any way that it is presented on the test. The biggest thing too, I think, is when you have tests that are concept heavy. So if it's more so like history courses, psychology, more of your liberal arts and sciences, you need to be able to apply what they are saying. So if they are giving you a concept to learn, or I know a common one would be a definition to learn. You need to do more than just memorize the definition. You need to memorize that definition and then be able to apply it in different scenarios. So kind of when you're studying, keep that in mind. Do I know this definition? Do I know this concept well enough to be able to explain it another person and put it in a scenario different than what I was taught in? I highly recommend reaching out to your learning assistant, teaching assistant, professor if you do have questions. I know it can be scary, but it is quite literally their job to answer your questions. And oftentimes, people who ask these questions will get answers that the rest of the class doesn't, simply because maybe the professor forgot to cover it, and then you kind of get the inside scoop. That will happen often. It can be little questions like how many questions is going to be on this exam. That can just help you feel more confident and less worried about it. The worst thing they can say is no, or slash, like, I'll get back to you or something like that. Sorry for this typo, but watching online videos can help a lot too. One of my classes, I rely on random YouTube videos to help me work through it. So computer programming, that can help a lot. There's so many videos on YouTube about how to do certain program codes and stuff like that. I also really like trying to teach the content to another person. So imagine that you're trying to teach it to a 5-year-old. That can really help you see how well you know the material, based on if you're able to do that. And then I always recommend study union if we have a session for you. So another study habit that I think needs to always be implemented is taking regular study breaks. So essentially what that means is that for every X amount of time you study, you need to take at least a 10-minute break. So for this one, I put an hour. There's also the Pomodoro technique / timer. Essentially for every 25 minutes you study, they'll do a 5-minute timer of a break. I kind of like studying for longer because I feel like I can get in a better flow and be more productive. But especially if you find that you need shorter breaks more often, the Pomodoro timer can be really helpful. This is what it's going to lead you to. It's essentially literally just a timer where you do your time that you're studying, your short break. You can do a long break. I recommend sticking to your short breaks. And that can help the study time go by faster for you too, especially if you notice that you have a 3-hour study session and you're not really sure how you're going to be able to get that all done and accomplish that. I also think this helps prevent burnout too during finals week, since you often have a lot of things you have to get done and study for, and it can kind of help just break it down easier so it doesn't feel like you're just sitting there for hours on end studying. So this is the one that I wanted to go into about test anxiety and tips for the test day. So if you notice that you're experiencing more anxiety than normal coming up to a final exam, especially, that is a completely normal side effect of just simply caring about your grades, caring about the class, and being successful within college. But the best antidote for this is good preparation. So if you are able to plan ahead, and as you all are attending this, it's November 13th, so you guys are doing great at planning ahead. You can start today planning that specific time, study time, and putting that in your calendar. That is one thing that always makes me feel more at ease when I plan my specific time that I'm going to get things done. I can visualize it more, and it makes me feel less overwhelmed and anxious about it. So I highly recommend doing that. Even today after this workshop, go ahead and get that out of the way, the study planner that I discussed earlier. Another thing is when we're going into the actual test, kind of lightly review the material that's going to be on the test for the day, whether it is going to be problem solving based or if it's a multiple choice final. Anything you can do to do some light problems, some light self-testing to kind of warm up your brain to the content that's going to be on that test and feel more confident going in. Don't do anything crazy, and don't review material that you know you've had difficulty learning and you have been stuck on. If you're doing that the morning of the test, it is just going to make you feel worse and more anxious. So that morning of the test, just a nice light review. I also encourage arriving to the testing environment early, slash if it is at a lot of the times it will be on campus and you just do it at home or in your designated environment. Definitely log on early, get comfortable in your area, prepare ahead of time so you're not either rushing to the actual class or rushing to connect to the internet and all that stuff. And then take a moment to take some deep breaths when you notice that your anxiety is spiking during the test, or you feel like you're kind of like in that moment when you opened up the test and you don't know the first thing. Take some breaths because it'll come back to you. It can just be that kind of 1 minute of anxiety when you first open the test. If you notice that you're still feeling anxious, especially since this is fall semester going into the spring semester, definitely check out some of your resources, which we'll go over on the last slide, but UCF CAPS is a really good one, as well as student accessibility services too. And then I highly recommend sticking to your regular sleep schedule when you're going the night before the test. So essentially this means that it is not going to be the time that you want to stay up later than usual. I know it's very tempting since you'll want to cram and get as much studying in as possible. But if you've been sticking to that week schedule of studying every day leading up to the test, you should not have to stay up until 1, 2, or 3 a.m. studying. Along with this, don't force yourself to go to bed extremely early. If you're usually go to bed at 11 p.m., but that night before you're trying to force yourself to go to bed at 9 p.m., it's simply going to make you sleep worse and be more anxious because you're sitting there like, oh my God, I haven't fallen asleep yet. So try to stick to your normal sleep cycle so you do feel as rested as possible going into that test. Also, there is a bunch of studies that show sleeping actually helps you solidify the information that is in your brain. So if you feel like you're behind in studying and it's already 11 p.m. or midnight, just go ahead. It's better to review what you know and sleep earlier than just stay up all night trying to cram in new information. Okay, so this is during the test. These are some tips that we might have learned in high school or earlier on in our educational careers, but we kind of forgot about. But I think it's important to go over them again because kind of little reminders like this help me a lot. So one of the biggest thing is read the instructions carefully. A lot of the time I will look back line if the test is on campus or something, but do your best to use your cursor to read the information and underline it as you're going through it. Another one is to be unsure of. So it's kind of that sunk cost fallacy. If sometimes we feel like since we've been on a question for 5 minutes now, we have to spend another 5 minutes trying to figure it out, even if we still don't get it. But the better thing to do is kind of just move on. And hopefully, if you do have time, you can come back and figure it out. But it's better just to get as many questions as we can done that we do know. Also, focusing on questions that are worth the most points. So if you have a section of the test that's worth 30 points, try to knock that out first rather than just a couple of 1-point questions down. Because typically those 30-point questions are going to be harder and take longer to do. So you want to make sure you have ample time for that. But again, if you've spent a good amount of time on it and you're not getting through, go ahead and knock out some of the easier questions. So on multiple choice, I think this is kind of a little hack that I like. Before I look at the answers, I think in my head what I would answer if it was a written in test, and then I'll compare my answer that I have in my head to the answers shown. This can make it a lot easier to remove any distracting answers that they're trying to trick you with or that might be easy mistakes. So try to do that first. This can make it actually more helpful than just seeing a bunch of options. And then also use the test against itself. So a lot of the times on a test, especially if it's multiple choice, I'll notice that another question actually answers a different question. So the answer to one question will be in kind of the instructions or like a formula or something that I have to use for a different part. So make sure you keep an eye out for that. And especially if you have time at the end to review, take a second to reflect on all of that to make sure you're not missing anything that could be easy like that. So this is just some advice for after the test. So I always like to give myself the rest of the day to kind of like discuss the test, go over it with my classmates and kind of ruminate on it, be like, okay, what'd you get for this, blah, blah. But the next day, try to focus on the other tests, your other finals, anything else other than that test, because at this point, especially since this is a final, the test is done. We can't sit there, worry about how you did on that when one, you probably have a lot of other finals that you need to worry about. And two, it is just going to make you feel worse. And there's no way that you can change it now. So what I think is best to do is kind of focus on what you have to do for your other exams, or take that well-deserved break because you genuinely did do the best you could, especially if you're sticking to all of this advice to try and prepare for the exam. So give yourself that breathing space and time to yourself. So this is coming towards the end of the presentation. I do want to reinforce a lot of the resources that UCF here has to offer you guys. The one I was referring to earlier was UCF Counseling and Psychological Services. We are the Student Academic and Resource Center. We partner with the Student Union to put on Study Union here. So check that out, especially if you do have a paper for your final exam. The University Writing Center can help as well. So that's kind of it. If you guys do have any questions, you can go ahead and put it in the chat. Otherwise, you can fill out this survey. If you were mandated to be here for any reason, you can scan this to let us know you were here and your name and everything. But I'm going to go ahead and pause the recording.